What's up, you lazy, entitled, basement-dwelling millennials, bootstrapping boomers, apathetic Xers, and goddamn Gen Z kids today? Today we're going to have some men getting involved in women's business about getting men out of women's business. That was more of a tongue twister than I thought it was going to be when I wrote it.
I don't know if you practiced that one
I
enough
did
on
not.
the way in here today in the car, you know?
Today we're going to have a two-part episode because we got two guests that are kind of related, but they both have their own organizations, and I wanted to give them both their own time. So we have here with us Justin from Men for Equity and Reproductive Justice, or MERJ, and Mike from Elevated Access. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us here today. We're doing this is our first early morning one, so we got coffee and little mixer here instead of beer like we normally do. But introduce your guys. Tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Absolutely, I can jump in here. My name is Justin Haas. I use he/him pronouns. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, so I'm a Midwestern guy, and my father and mother were both civil rights attorneys for many, many years. My dad dating back all the way to the 60s, in which he defended the families of Mark Clark and Fred Hampton, the two Black Panthers who were shot and killed in Chicago in 1969. Wow. So I didn't have this kind of coming-of-age story where I kind of matured in my anti-racist journey or my social justice journey in high school or college. It started with me pretty young. There's a famous story of me when I was young because I loved to play chess, and I was like, why does white always have to go first? And so this idea of white supremacy was baked in pretty young, and so I just remember growing up and being like, why are all my peers reading Harry Potter when I'm reading the autobiography of Malcolm X? So I started young in my social justice journey, and I've been doing reproductive justice work for about 5 years now, and I'm really glad to be on the call with Mike.
Yeah, so I'm Mike. I go by Bonanza as my pseudonym for my last name. I blur out my photo just because there's a lot of crazies out there that want to do violence to organizations like ours, and so we practice security everywhere that we can. So I, like Justin, was born in Illinois, but I was born in the rural part of Illinois. My high school class had about 20 people in it, and I grew up in a conservative Christian family, small rural community. And when people like to talk to me about some of these issues, I like to talk about how, you know what, I was in your shoes. I had your beliefs at one point too, and really during college started to deconstruct some of my religion and other things, and eventually went through a libertarian phase, which I think every young man does at some point, and eventually ended up now calling myself calling myself somewhere around the progressive leftist side of things, and having spent now the last 3 years working in reproductive justice, having only learned the term about 3.5 years ago. And I should also say that what we do at Elevated Access, we're an organization of volunteer pilots that flies people to get access to abortion and gender-affirming care when they can't get it in their community, whether just lack of providers or if it's banned in their state or whatever the case may be.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, no, those are both really great intros, guys. Thanks for hopping on. First questions first, though. Mike, did you read Harry Potter, though, growing up, or was it Malcolm X's autobiography?
I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, so Harry Potter didn't exist when I was a kid. But I've read a lot of fantasy books. Actually, my parents admitted well into my adulthood that when I got interested in Dungeons and Dragons, they talked to one of my teachers like, hey, is that okay? Like, because that was during peak satanic panic. I don't know if you all are familiar with that of the 80s, about how Dungeons and Dragons and heavy metal were going to make kids Satanists. So.
Yep. And then follow-up question, Justin, have you read Harry Potter since?
The important issues right here.
I would love to say that I have just for your viewership, but I'm going to say I read about a book and a half. I know, terrible. Yeah, fantasy is just not my genre. I think I find myself more in the fiction or more in the nonfiction space is most often what I read. Yeah, not great.
No, there's some fantastic stories to be learned in that space. Most of which are based in reality. So congratulations on having a better grasp than most of us on reality.
So, I mean, To Kill a Mockingbird then must have been one of your childhood favorites, I'm assuming.
It was pretty good. It was pretty good. As I've gotten older, there's been more and more complex stuff that has come out about the book that has made me a little bit more that has made me struggle with it. But I actually got to see a performance of it when I was a kid. That was not, I mean, life changing. Obviously, my father,
Yeah.
a white man who grew up in Atlanta, in segregated Atlanta, that courtroom drama aspect was something that I both believed to have happened when I was younger, when I couldn't go to the courtroom to see my dad do it
Hmm.
or my mom do it. Was something that I was like always envious about and felt like they had pretty big shoes to fill. So I kind of moved into the education route instead of becoming a lawyer, and that's why I'm a teacher right now.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know. I figured with your dad kind of being the real life. I don't want to say version of Atticus Finch, but just in that vein of a white man defending black people in a very racially turbulent time in our history. That's a pretty cool thing, and I think that the book resonated with me as it was. It's just it's a good book to begin with, especially at that age when you're starting to learn about those kinds of things.
Yep,
But can imagine it hit a little bit closer to home for you at that age.
definitely,
But
definitely.
let's move on. Let's move on a little bit here. I'm more familiar with Mike's organization with Elevated Access because I like things with motors and flying, and so that was an easy one to fall into. But until he introduced me to you, I had not heard of MERJ. Can you tell me a little bit about your organization, how it got started, what you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. So similar to Elevated Access is an all-volunteer organization. Started with four guys that were pretty alarmed by our absence of being participatory in the social justice and reproductive justice framework, especially after the Texas Senate Bill 8 came out in 2001. We realized that the Dobbs decision was coming down the pike, and men need to get off the sidelines, right? There's that whole discussion, a whole quote by that Brene Brown stole from a former president that talks about getting into the arena, and so we felt like
Mm-hmm.
it is our job to get into the arena. And so four guys came together and we formed to support a space, particularly for Black, Indigenous, and women of color led organizations. And MERJ supports like full access to abortion and all other reproductive justice rights. As a group of men, we commit to unlearning the continued systemic legacy of patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy. And the way we do that is a couple things. One is that we are pushing ourselves to kind of be physically vulnerable while we do clinic escort work. So many of our members work and volunteer at clinics to make sure that those spaces are safe for anyone who wants to get health care from reproductive justice clinics. We do fundraising. So we're fundraising for different organizations, including Elevated Access in the past. And then we lift up media-wise, we lift up documentaries and film and posts by BIPOC women specifically, that has created a whole ecosystem. So thinking about the business of birth control is an organization or is a film that discusses kind of the difficulties of having just a unilateral birth control without having an examination of the side effects. This does not purport the idea that we should get rid of birth control by any means, but it just says that like most things that have to affect women or people who are non-binary, they're not researched. And so this was an opportunity for them to fundraise and focus on how we could have more research in the birth control space. Similarly, it was a 15-year-old. That documentary came at 15 years after The Business of Being Born, which was kind of showing the interwoven aspects of capitalism and the birthing process. And so one of the examples of this is that we often see women who are giving birth or people giving birth when they're laying down, when actually that for their bodies, that's actually one of the most difficult spaces for them to push out a child. And so just like little things like this, also the rate of C-sections increase at Friday at 5 o'clock because doctors want to leave. This was data that came out of either Mount Sinai or another New York-based hospital. And so We do. We are kind of a continued gathering space for we have a reading group. We have a fundraising group. We have and then we have panel discussions so that men can get more educated on things all the way from birth control to later term abortions to menopause to sexual assault and trauma. So yeah, again, I really appreciate being here, and this is a great conversation.
All right, awesome. I appreciate, like, that was definitely more in depth. You answered some of the questions that I already had listed out here, so I appreciate all of that. But I think something, and I don't mean for this to sound critical, but I like kind of throwing the harder questions in here and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. And obviously, I fully support what you guys are doing. But to play devil's advocate, it's often talked about how men have no place in this discussion. Like, men are not supposed to have a voice in women's bodies and women's bodily autonomy, and I think we all agree with that on the aspect of we should not be legislating women's bodily autonomy. But this, in a way, can sometimes go both ways, where it may feel almost like we're mansplaining an issue, or we are speaking of a place of authority. We're taking another issue that is women dominated, and we're putting ourselves in the middle of it. And why do you think that this is the appropriate approach or an appropriate course of action, specifically a men-focused organization on this particular issue, and what that brings to the table versus supporting women-led organizations on this particular issue?
Mike, do you want to jump in here, or do you want me to?
Well, I have a personal story that I can tell, like, to really answer that question, because, so I think, what Justin's organization does, what we do, Elevate Access, is we're not here to come into spaces that are women-led and people of color-led to tell them, like, hey, here's what you need to do, here's what you should be doing. It's really to go into those spaces to listen. From my own personal experience, during Me Too, I had a woman colleague of mine who had been harassed by another colleague of ours. And we worked at a large higher education institution. And she was trying to navigate, how to get, justice, how to get this, dealt with. And I was trying to help her navigate. I was pretty well familiar with all the university systems and who the right people were to talk to and all that kind of stuff. And trying to give her that guidance about that she was asking for, trying to figure out what to do. And she's one day she said to me, like, it's great that you're out here behind me, like, helping me, figure this out. But also, you have a lot of influence and power, and you can be out there trying to change how all this works. And so, really, I like, ouch, because I felt like I was falling down a little bit, and could have been doing more. But I took that to say, okay, I hear you. Thank you for that. And so I started thinking about what I could do. So in that context, it was going to university administration and saying and practically demanding that we need to change our sexual harassment policies so that people like her could feel safe at work and not face that kind of harassment. And so similarly in this work, when there's a phrase out there you may have seen in social media or other places, like trust Black women in particular, because they're the ones that face a lot of these things. Their maternal mortality rates are 3 times higher than white women. There are all sorts of issues that affect women of color way worse than white women get. And so when people ask about, like, okay, how do I get into this movement without necessarily coming into white knight, coming into take over, coming into dominate, is look for the Black and brown women and ask them what they want you to do.
I'll just add to that, and I have a similar story, especially around like anti-racist work, right? Like, I was an organizer in college, and I would organize with Black students predominantly because it was them who actually got to share what were the issues that they were facing and what were the obstacles for them to have an equal opportunity at the college that I went to. And so it was one of my friends, a Black student, who was like, "Why aren't you organizing white people to do anti-racist work?" And I think a part of social justice framework that has got to be shared more by this woman, Heather Hackman, who does great anti-racist organizing, talks about, we're addressing issues of power and privilege, We're talking about multiple non-dominant perspectives or learning from multiple non-dominant perspectives. And then the third part is rigorous self-reflection. And you can't do rigorous self-reflection with people who are not you, you know? And so it's like, why are we not organizing men when I want to do that self-reflection with other men, right? How often when I talk about the dynamics around the fact that most abortions are caused by inappropriate expelling of ejaculate, right? Why are we not talking about the fact that men are the ones causing the women to get pregnant in the first place, rather than the women who are saying, oh, now they're pregnant, now what do we do with that business? And so there's this author, Gabrielle Blair, who did a great quote on this, which is like, no, I'm not taking responsibility away from women. I'm just reminding men of theirs. And so it's like it's a moment of reckoning with, we can't just leave our space. There's a great organization called Men for Choice who talk about how 45 million men in this country at least are pro-choice but are on the sidelines. And so how do we get those men off the sidelines? It's not by women asking the men to get off the sidelines. It's that men need to say, hey, it's attractive to come off the sidelines.
Yeah, I mean, those are some really, really well thought out and well articulated answers, guys. I think anybody who has that view, or the opposing view rather, would have a difficult time finding any weaknesses in, just the support of men being, needing to have a voice and just to influence other men, if nothing else, than just to say to your, fellow guy, like, we need to be doing something if this is what we believe in, and if, we want to support our female better halves.
Absolutely, and I mean, okay, go ahead.
No, what I was gonna say was just like, I remember this kind of also as a kid, where it's like, my mom, we'd be watching TV, me and my sister would be watching TV, and my mom would say, come to dinner, or, you got to clean your room or something. And she'd say it 3, 4, 5, 6 times. And my dad would have to yell at us, and then we would do it. Right? So it's like, how interesting is it that this person in our family who has been given this power by society in a lot of ways actually makes the most impact? And it's like, hey, we got a lot of privilege as men. Why aren't we using it with other men?
And I think that's a great point. Obviously, I'm a straight white guy who yells on the internet all the time, and I talk a lot about racial issues and women's rights issues and that sort of thing. And I feel very similar in the sense that I have been given a ton of luck and privilege in life, just being born a straight white man to begin with. Where I have that leg up in society just from that by itself, but then obviously given this platform on social media, and I feel like it would be irresponsible to not use that to speak up for the people less fortunate than me. But it's also something that I try to keep in the forefront of my mind doing this. Is I'm talking from a place of advocacy and never from a position of authority on these issues and these topics. And it's a difficult thing, especially as straight white men, and we're just used to being the presence in the room and the leadership of society, and like, hey, this is how we do things because we're the ones who set the rules and make things happen, and we know what's best, and I know I'm doing this because it's what's best for you. And if we start coming across that way, no, I'm not at all suggesting that you guys have ever come across that way. I'm just, I guess, for the broader conversation, putting that out there, that it's something that obviously we're a group of 4 white guys talking about women's issues and racial issues, and we always need to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, and I think there's one way, Jared, that I think that we as white men can do stuff in spaces, especially in spaces where we don't see that other representation. But even especially in spaces where we do see that other representation, is speaking up when our peers are doing or saying things that like aren't cool. Like calling something gay. Using the R word. Those kinds of things. Like, you know what? Let's not talk like that. We don't need to talk like that. We can use other words. We can call something lame without using other ways to talk about it being lame, that are using our kind of our power, our latent power in society to put those things as negative or down, or using words just that we just don't use those words anymore.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. And that's, I think, a really important message, and honestly one that's very, very difficult for I think a lot of men in our society, because a lot of those things have been so ingrained, especially people who grew up in the 80s and the 90s. You know, everything was gay back then, and not in the homosexual way, and stuff like that. And then like me, especially growing up rural Minnesota, living in rural Minnesota, and having a lot of people who aren't as exposed to these issues in the way that you do are when you live in a more populated place or get to go to college or something like that. Finding ways to respectfully make them understand why that behavior or those words are inappropriate, because a lot of times they don't intentionally mean it that way. They're not being um, uh, intentionally hurtful or harmful. They just have not understood that that's not a societally acceptable thing to do, and it is hurtful and harmful to people that they just haven't had the experiences of being around. And making them understand that, because if you just come out and tell somebody, hey, you're being a homophobic jackass, or you're being a racist, or you're being sexist, you're not going to get anywhere. You're probably going to lose a friend, and they're going to continue that behavior, and you're just going to no longer have that relationship. When if it's finding that way to move that needle and help them understand on an empathetic level. And I think that's it sounds like what your organization, Justin, is kind of the driving force behind that, is moving the foundation of, I'm not sure what I'm trying to say.
Manhood.
Manhood. The foundation of
No, I
manhood.
mean,
And yeah, go ahead.
no, I mean, I just want to, yeah, I think it's a really, really important point, and it's like, not only is calling something, I think it's really important, yes, that we be able to name that things are sexist, things are racist. At the same time, saying someone is those things, yes, doesn't really particularly allow them to have anywhere to go from there, especially because shame and guilt drive people to more paralysis oftentimes than it does to activism. Um, and I do think that it's important for men to realize that, like, the way we do call in men is the reality that patriarchy itself has actually impacted us as well. That we are often stuck in a man box, right? I know a bunch of men who've decided to, like, get involved in watching sports or learning about sports just because they feel lonely or awkward in other social settings with men because they can't talk about anything else. And it's like, well, why are we caged by these by these strict language guidelines, by these topic guidelines, and in reality, it's like we aren't able to actually live out our full selves as men. And so, yeah, I just feel like merge is definitely a space for us as men to unpack those things, to get out of the man box, as it was coined by Paul Kivel way back when.
Yeah, I think I'll
I
even
think
throw in here.
oh, go ahead. No,
I was
no,
gonna
you go
throw
ahead.
in. Yeah, so I was gonna throw in here a really good. I know, like, personally, I like reading short form text. I hate, like, news articles and stuff. I hate reading books just because it takes so much time. But a book I think for men that really want to dig into this, and it isn't like a hard read, is the book Will to Change by Bell Hooks. It is an excellent book that talks about how, you know, basically we are raised as men that the one emotion we're allowed to show is anger. That is the one emotion that we are allowed to show, and it talks about in that book. She goes into white supremacy and colonialism and the patriarchy, and but talks about how it's not men's fault that they are this way. It's like our society made men this way,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's and she talks about how it's unfair to men to be like, just call them out and jump down their throats for saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, because they don't know any better, a lot of times. And so that's where, like, reading a book like this, joining a group like Merge, having these conversations with your friends, like, hey, let's not make rape jokes because they're not funny, stuff like
Right.
that, because that's how we're going to change these things, so that we don't pass this on to our sons and the other men in our lives.
Absolutely. I wanted to also just talk a little bit more when Justin was talking about how people fall into these behaviors. They learn about sports and stuff not because they care particularly like sports, but they're just looking for a social setting. And I'm going completely off of memory. I read an article about a study that was done a little while back about flat earthers and radicalist groups and even MAGA at this point. And like a lot of these people don't genuinely believe the insane bullshit that they subscribe to. Like a lot of flat earthers don't genuinely believe that the earth is flat. I gotta imagine a lot of people in MAGA don't really believe Hillary Clinton is drinking, infant blood in a slab-on-grade pizzeria basement. But being a part of those groups makes them a part of an in crowd, makes them a part of a pre-built social structure where I just say I believe these things, and now I have friends. Now I'm a part of something, and I think that definitely extends even just. I think it just extends off of what you were saying is men really struggle because again men are brought up to be like, okay, here's the things you can be into, these are the things you can like, these are the emotions you can feel, these are the types of friends that you should have, and if you aren't able to fit into those social structures, you do get very lonely, and it's not really acceptable to be like, all right, I'm a more emotional man and I want these types of friends groups and I enjoy going to theater or whatever it is that you're doing that's not traditionally masculine. So I think that that's an interesting point, and I think that obviously spreads out if it is the case with these wild, harmful conspiracy theories and these radical movements that those kind of things are drawing people in.
Well, and it's not even those like the conspiracy type things. It's the whole like red pill movement. It's Andrew Tate. It's all the men,
alpha male,
right? Who like they're drawn into this sort of like way to live your life because now men are sort of in a way being asked to have some emotions, and we're really in the infancy stages, societally speaking, as to like how that actually looks in pop culture. Like, there's not a lot of TV shows out there that shows like a man who isn't like the head of the household that is just like emotionally not like immature and or needs to have authority in order to be a good parent. Like, we don't have decades on decades of that sort of the
social
ingrainment.
construct,
Right.
yeah. No, that's very accurate.
So a couple things. One is like I hear you both, and I'm just like, it's, you said this, they're like more emotional men. It's like I want us to be able to be like, we are. Every man is emotional. Every man
Absolutely.
is emotional, and we just don't know how to express it. And what I think it does is a real disservice, because I think men should be able to be angry. It is a natural emotion that men should be able to engage in, except if that's the only outlet that you have, when it's really actually embarrassment, or when it's really pity, or when it's really frustration, or when there's
Sadness.
again. Exactly, sadness. I mean, that's a huge one. Despair, and depression. I mean, that's things that are affecting men on a constant basis. I mean, why are we seeing the rates of, especially white men, committing suicide at such a high rate? It's because we have no community, or we have very little community. And I'm not, this is not a. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I don't want to kind of circle back to that women. That there's some fault in women, but there are like this new social media trend of trad wives, traditional wives that are in their place, right? And it's like they also enforce the man box. There's women that enforce that men have to be X, Y, Z, right? The women that Andrew Tate has on his shows, it's like, are some of these women are purporting that that's what they want in a man, and it's like, what does that do to to men everywhere? It's a disservice to say, oh well, if I'm going to get a woman that looks like that, quote unquote, that's what I need to be. And so it's definitely our responsibility. Yes, it falls definitely more on the man for sure, but there's these, just like Mike was saying, these are systems that are being reinforced and then lifted up by these algorithms, clearly.
And I want to make like very clear, just in the way that was portrayed, like this in the same way that men knowing that the only or feeling that the only emotion they can feel is anger is not necessarily their fault. This is a societal thing that we have all grown up to and been put in this man box. Many women who also fall into that prop up of the patriarchy and this internalized misogyny is the exact same thing. These are the structures. Many of them grew up in conservative households. This is how it's supposed to be, religious households, things like that, where the man is the head of the household, and this is the structure, and this is what it takes to be a good woman, a good wife, a good mother. You need to do these things. And so it's so frustrating to see obviously women helping the patriarchy be the patriarchy as well. But once again, this is they're victims of the society that we've all been subject to and help perpetuate and build as well, And so I don't want anybody to feel that we're putting that blame there, I guess, if that makes sense.
Oh, definitely not. It is, we are so much of, how we are brought around in the society, and like even to the point, like I was having this conversation the other day. It's like, why do women wear makeup and dresses and men don't? It's like, well, that's just because the way things are in society. It's not like there's anything genetic about that. There's not anything that is, about being having certain genitalia or anything like that. That's just like, nope, that's just the way our society is. And so we've got to, it's not what becomes men's fault is when we refuse to look for opportunities to grow. So if we're hearing these conversations and we're like, that sounds hard, I don't want to do that, well, then you do become part of the problem as opposed to trying to make it different.
Absolutely. And hey, some of the best people doing makeup out there are men, like
That's
which
true.
I
Yes.
think is which I think is one of the greatest things about social media is it's making especially like short form video content is it's making those types of spaces okay. Like you get to see men in heels with painted nails doing makeup tutorials and stuff like this and just owning it, and a bunch having a huge following and a huge community, and other people see that and I'm like, okay, cool. If I was ever interested in that, or this is the kinds of like these things are okay and an acceptable part of society, and other people accept these people, and it's okay to move into these spaces or at least accept those spaces and not view them as weird or emasculine or whatever traditional form you felt that with. But I think we've kind of beat this to death. I kind of want to get back to your organization with MERJ and everything. That's as much my fault as anybody else's. Looking on your website and everything, and then kind of listening to you talk about MERJ, it sounds like a lot of great stuff, but it feels just very kind of shotgun scattered, both in your description and kind of what I could read on the website. Do you have like really specific missions that you're working on? Do you have a specific, more specific structure, or is it just kind of you fill the needs where you feel the needs need to be filled at the time, or where things work as they come along?
So a lot of our work is kind of, it's not going to be broadcasted because it is relationships with Black and Brown organizations that are asking us for. Again, this is a piece of us not trying to lead and be all like know-it-alls in this space. We are not experts by any means, and we are late to the game. We are decades, if not hundreds of years behind, where people, where people, especially women, have known and are knowing, and so a lot of the work that we do are kind of rapid response work for these organizations. If folks need funds for an organizing thing, if folks need, wow, I just had a brain fart moment, like artwork, or if they need travel funds / the ability to actually move, whether we send a car, similar to elevated access in that way, right? So we are receptive to what are the needs in our specific communities. Like one of the big things is doing clinic escort work, so showing up and actually putting your life on the line in a lot of ways, in where harm can be caused, for antis is what they're called at the clinic. And so it is scattered, and we're continuing to kind of refine and redefine what MERJ looks like, but it's really also a center for men to come in and share what have their experiences been. One of the more powerful moments at MERJ has been a discussion around what has it been like for men to lose a child. We often talk about for the woman or the person who's had an abortion, to not lose a child, lose a fetus, or the pregnancy has ended, what is that like for the man in that relationship? What is it like for the family of that man in that relationship? How do we kind of expand and be able to express without putting the labor on our partners, without putting the labor on Black and brown women especially, and give it and open up a space for men to do so.
No, I love that. That's great, and I appreciate that clarity. Because yeah, I was obviously trying to do a little bit of research here beforehand, and was trying to pick up on exactly what MERJ was, and I think that
One
that's
of the
great. Oh, go ahead.
One of the things that we're actually starting to do as well is we recognize that in the event of a Donald Trump presidency, birth control is going to be probably potentially taken off the market. And so one of the things that we've been doing and we've been asked to by organizations is stockpiling birth control pills for people. We've also tried to set up systems so that people, similar to Women on the Web or Women on Web, which was a function of an organization called Women on Waves, which was started by Rebecca Gumpertz, which was trying to get women birth control so that they could take it without having to go to, with doing an online doctor service rather than having to go into a clinic.
So I got a question about that. Is how exactly are you stockpiling birth control? Obviously, usually these are prescription medications. How do you go about getting those, storing those, and whatnot?
Love to share more, but I think we gotta. I can't tell too much about it.
You can't tell the
But
secrets. Can't tell us how the sausage is made. I respect that. I understand that.
But I
Totally
appreciate you
understand
asking.
that. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I was very curious, and mhm.
we're working with several
I won't
organizations to do.
I won't put pressure on that one. I totally understand the need for some some
Plus,
secrecy there.
there is since as men we probably don't follow these things very often. There is now a over-the-counter birth control pill, the O pill, and so you
Hmm.
could without necessarily getting involved with Justin's effort, you could still stockpile O pill to make sure that is available after the if we get into situations like that.
Yeah, that's great to know. Yeah, I did not know that was available. Um, so then membership. So you're based in Illinois, is that correct?
It's a national organization, so a couple of our members, or the kind of the leadership team, one is in California, I live in Washington D.C. right now. Another friend of mine, or another one of our volunteers, he lives in Virginia, as well as kind of the last person in our leadership team is in New Jersey, and we have an email list of about I guess we're looking at like 200 or 300 at the moment.
Okay.
And so we are just trying to expand more and more. If men are looking to get activated even further, please look at Men for Choice, that is run out of Chicago, and that was started about 7 or 8 years ago. And they have like praxis programs where they run men through cycles of unlearning and relearning masculinity, as well as how to get more and more involved in the reproductive justice effort. And so I think it's important for us to make sure that we define what reproductive justice is, and this is just a kind of a larger framework that Loretta Ross has shared, and that is kind of the right to have children, the right to not have children, and then the right to parent children in safe and sustainable communities. I think it's really critical that we realize that this reproductive justice fight, yes, is interwoven with a lot of other fights that we're working for. So around climate justice, right? Why do we see the increase in cancer rates or in fetal problems from parents who are living closer to oil and gas plants or fracking plants, right? How do we see those connections, environmental racism, and how does it show up? Obviously, when we talked about Rebecca Gumpertz before, what she did was she realized that as a lawyer she could find a loophole in international law where she brought women actually on board a ship in international waters and provided them abortion care in international waters around countries that they themselves where abortion was illegal. So it was really interesting to see how kind of the international focus of the United States is right now around reproductive justice and how it can be a model for other spaces, and how often we are far and far behind, many. Western as well as other countries that are pushing the envelope.
It's funny you should mention that. In one of my comments not long ago on this topic, somebody went to a rant and they're like, I'm voting for Trump because I'm anti-choice, and I don't want the rest of the world to look at us and be judging us because we allow people to murder the unborn infants and this. And I'm like, who's judging? Like, what country is it? It's not France. It's not Germany. It's not the UK. It's not any Scandinavian country. Like what country? Australia? Not them either. What country are you talking about? Yeah, that comment, I may have used some colorful language and got taken down for community guideline violations, but it was mind-boggling to me. So what the hell are you talking about when you're saying other countries, any peer nation that we have out there that we would aspire to be like, I would hope, has taken care of this issue for the most part, and it's just a non-issue. And here we're in the dark ages still.
There's a larger conversation as well around just the overall healthcare of. I mean, I always find it just absolutely hilarious that like these are pro-life people when they obviously are not pro-life of the mother or pro-life of families or pro-life of anyone else involved. Besides the thing that, as you all mentioned in your last podcast, hasn't had taken a single breath yet. Right, which the Bible talks about, right? So it's very interesting, and not only are we behind, but we're not even, obviously. I mean, there's a whole plan, right, to not focus on our children, on our investment in old people, right? That's why we have the education crisis that we do in this country. But you think about a place like, I think it was Norway. I apologize if I don't remember. It's either Norway or Sweden that just gave grandparents the ability to get paid through parental leave.
Yeah.
How far behind are we to acknowledge the fact that grandparents do a heck of a job in this country to help raise our children and have done since during slavery? I mean, it's pretty amazing to think about what does it mean for a country to actually invest in their citizens in a way that actually helps the new citizens progress at a high level.
Oh, absolutely. We pretend like we're the leaders of the free world, and in many ways, we're so far behind. We're getting lapped by the rest of the free world, and that's a great example of that.
That sounds like a whole lot of profit loss, to me. It sounds like a whole lot of social safety nets and lack of individualism.
I'm sorry. That sounds like socialism, which I'm pretty sure is the same thing as communism, which is basically Nazism. And, is that what you want, huh? I mean,
Right,
you don't
yeah.
want to work to death for free like that. That's what you should be doing.
That sounds like the opposite of what America should be.
Absolutely. Grandpappy did not fight the Nazis, so Grandma could get paid to take care of my children, okay?
That's right. I mean, a part of this issue is like obviously this impacts, healthcare surrounding child bearing impacts Black women disproportionately, and obviously that's important to call out. But I think it is also important to call out that this also impacts just poor people in general in that way, and everything kind of does come back to like how we treat each other in this in our society, economically speaking, and how we take care of our communities.
When we really boil it down to the base level, it really goes away. There isn't really sexism. There isn't really racism. It is all classism, and we're just putting people in a slightly lower class based on their gender or their race. But there's poor white people, especially all through the rural South, who are struggling with all of these same issues that you could have. Obviously, they're not getting prejudiced because they're Black, and I don't want to conflate those things, but they have not had the access to health care, to reproductive care, to education, to food and shelter access that many other disenfranchised groups have as well. and we really just need to focus on, I think, economic justice across the board, and that would fix a lot of these problems. And
Which
economic
Donald
justice.
Trump, for those poor white folks out there, will not help you with. I'm just telling you that,
No, no,
right?
no. I know. But again, it goes back to internalized misogyny, that the trad wife trend, or obviously we see it with the Candace Owens and the Clarence Thomases
Oh,
of
yeah.
the minority communities. There's people out there of every community that go against the interests of their own communities or their own best interests simply because that's the community they grew up in. That's the propaganda they've been subjected to. This is the harmful behaviors and beliefs that they've been taught, and they haven't had the ability, or they've been blocked from the ability to unlearn those things. And you can find that across the board. And like I said, I don't want to conflate the struggles of, obviously, the African American community in our country has been subjected to compared to even poor rural people. But again, it's a classist issue
Well,
across the
it's
board.
interesting to to dive into this research and dive into the history even more when we do there's a pervasiveness around the impact and the disproportionate impact around poor people for sure. And then as we learn the history around reproductive justice and who has access to choice, when we talk about pro-choice, well, how is it that you have the choice to go get an abortion, but you don't have the money to go where you need to go to get the abortion, right? Right? If you don't have the money to stay in a hotel, and Mike will talk about this in a little while, but if you don't have the money to stay in a hotel for 3 days for a waiting period in Ohio to go and get the reproductive care that you need, or the health care that you need, really, then that's not a choice. But I think about the history in terms of different racial groups in this country have been met with different systems of oppression in this particular arena. So we talk about black women specifically, and for a long time they were obviously forced to have children. They were in order for slavery to kind of explode in terms of the amount of population. Then they were then many sterilized, right? Similar to Latin American women, Latinx women in California. There's tons of reports out there that they were going to Planned Parenthood, and actually Planned Parenthood was doing the one sterilizing folks in an effort to bring down their population. So then you have
I want to time you out right there. Do you have any like citations on that? Because that's a pretty bold claim. I haven't heard, but I don't want to be spreading any type of information, especially on Planned Parenthood. Does a lot of great work in the reproductive justice arena and family planning arena and just women's healthcare in general arena. And I don't want to give anybody any fodder that's not completely backed up. I'm not saying you're lying by any means.
Absolutely. This again was when Planned Parenthood started way back when. Now the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, was a
Eugenicist.
Say that again?
Eugenicist.
Eugenicist, right? And so she was the one who purported a lot, and that's why they took Margaret Sanger off the name recently, actually, in New York. It was a big, successful movement to take her name off of the flagship Planned Parenthood, because she purported a white supremacist idea of women's healthcare or reproductive healthcare. So there's definitely these components. I will definitely provide the citation for you maybe after the call. But I think that it's critical for us to examine that when different groups, and again, these groups themselves are not monoliths. So you're going to have a varying array of people's responses to abortion and reproductive justice. But I think it's critical for us to say, who has had access to choice and who has not, and then who has been forced to be either sterilized or been forced to give birth, and therefore the abortion fight or the reproductive justice fight looks different from those different avenues. I'll look the citation up now.
And even I looked it up while Justin was talking. That's why you got tag team, right? So,
Thank you, Mike.
So the National Institutes of Health have an article about the history of sterilization of Latina women in California, and actually even in 2021, California agreed to start compensating the families of the women that had been forcibly sterilized. So,
all right, Thane, was there a year on that, like when they were doing this? I just want full context for this, because it's the first time I've heard about it, and I'm a little bit appalled to hear it, obviously.
Yeah.
But
well, so the one article, I'm reading an article from NBC News, a woman who was 13 when she was sterilized in California, and I believe her family members or her same generation are still alive today. So so it's in the recent. And even like as another example, when I specifically looked up as part of this conversation, we talked like the roots of gynecology in our country are born in slavery, of like Justin said, of in slavery. It was about breeding as many slaves as possible, to put it bluntly.
Mm-hmm.
And even today, as of this year, the Department of Health and Human Services banned medical schools from allowing their med students to provide pelvic exams while women were unconscious for other procedures. Did you like hearing about that story? Is just absolutely shocking that med schools, and not just like one or two, like multiples of them, were doing pelvic exams of women while they were getting other procedures, and were unconscious for them and couldn't provide consent and weren't asked to provide consent.
Wow, that is, yeah, disturbing. And obviously, so much of our medical history in general is incredibly disturbing, going throughout history.
Yeah, the field of modern gynecology was founded by J. Marion Sims, who in the mid 1800s repeatedly and forcibly, apparently, performed invasive experiments on enslaved black women without anesthesia.
Yep.
Wow.
According to Planned Parenthood website. I looked up also Sanger as well.
And
they have-
I definitely want to purport that Planned Parenthood is a fantastic organization, and by all means. And again, this kind of like defunding of Planned Parenthood, even though they commit, as you all said in the last podcast, 1% of all the work that they do is focused on abortions, and yet they're targeted for that 1%. And I just again, when you unpack, and I love what you were talking about in your last podcast, where it's like once you unpack, even just for a minute, the ideas of some of the right wing and the far right, is that you realize like why would they ever want to live in the world that they want to create? So, for instance, one of the, it's like, okay, so if we're going to defund Planned Parenthood, I myself have gotten STD testing at Planned Parenthood, and it was really useful in my life. And so the reality is like, so if you defund this place, you want a bunch of people to now not have STD testing and to have STDs walking around without being tested and live in that type of world? I mean, that's going back to Arcanian ideas, right? So it's like that structure it disadvantages men and how they live their own lives, and it costs men. Go ahead, keep on.
Yeah, and no, and that's a great, going back to your access point, like who has access to healthcare, any healthcare, reproductive healthcare specifically in this topic, but Planned Parenthood is a lot of people's only access to healthcare. A lot of poor communities' only access to healthcare, and that's not just reproductive healthcare, but like as you said, STD testing, prenatal care as well, but just screenings like breast cancer screenings and a lot of things that people are either in communities where there's no other clinics available to do that nearby that they can access, or they don't have the money to afford to go to those because clearly healthcare is a luxury in this country and not a privilege and a luxury, not a given. And so when you try to remove Planned Parenthood from these communities or defund them, you're robbing so many people of so many services that there's just no replacement for in those communities, and that affects people of all race, religion, creed, color, and gender, and that's just a true disservice.
I mean, I think a one plug for men to get involved in the work is that you become more attractive to the opposite sex in a lot of ways, or the opposite gender, excuse me, or not the opposite, because it's not just two, but I think it's really interesting how these ideas around like incels, men, I mean, going back to what our previous conversation was, incels, it's like, oh, I have no community. I don't know how to find a woman that I can be with, and it's like, well, why don't you start to learn and understand the livelihoods of what women or people who don't look like you go through? You're gonna be more and more attractive to those people once you do that. It's like, I don't know why people have forgotten that little loop. I'm gonna have to jump off in a minute, but I just want to name that I think it's critical for us to not only be kind of like shooting in the dark about what we are hoping, and really kind of hone in on exactly what we're looking for. And so, again, great book, it's called Reproductive Justice. And and it's by Loretta Ross. And she says reproductive justice is achieved when women, girls, and individuals have the social, economic, and political power and resources to make healthy decisions about our bodies, sexuality, and reproduction for ourselves, our families, and our communities. That is what we're looking for. That is what we're aiming towards. And so please join MERJ. We welcome you. We love you as men. We want you in. And again, it's the time. It's critical,
Well,
right? Because we
so-
know our cousins, our mothers, our daughters are getting affected by this.
Absolutely. And with that, I want like the call to action. What can people do to help? How can they join? What can they do when they join? Where do they go to do that? How can they support your organization? Give us your shameless plug here.
No, yeah, I appreciate that. The biggest thing is read. I mean, I think it takes a while, and you can read short articles like Mike likes to do, and that's really critical. And just start to develop a little bit more time in your day, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, towards this effort. If that means moving money towards these organizations, we have a whole list of organizations on our website. We have a list of organizations that people can go and see which ones they're closest to if they need reproductive health care. You're welcome to join MERJ. It's called joinmerj.org, and we welcome you. One of the other things I would say is get involved at your local healthcare clinic where you can become a clinic escort. And then support organizations like Mike's at Elevated Access, who are literally transporting people to healthcare that, one, we should have in this country, bar none, for sure, without having so many barriers and obstacles.
All right. Well, sounds great. We appreciate so much that you took time today. I loved learning about your organization. I hope you didn't feel like I picked on you too much. It was
not at all. Not at all. It was an
Okay,
actual
good.
pleasure. You all have a
Yeah.
great rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Yep. Thanks, Justin.